So I'm at a really legendary place over here. This is where Odi's gonna run his FD operation from. We were in the shop today and now we're at the new location. Odi's over here and we're gonna talk a little bit about drift cars. So, a brand new place, brand new you, or?
Yeah, so we just moved the race cars out of Feal Suspension because they were essentially on the same property, but now this shop is dedicated solely to the race cars, so just the race program. So we have a lot of space because we're running a 2-car team.
Right.
Technically run 3 cars because 2 of them are comp cars.
Right.
The third car is a practice car. And we want to entertain builds because that's also fun. So, you know, I built a Corvette last year.
Right.
We built a IS drift wagon like a few years ago. I want to continue doing that all the time. So,
but for yourself or clients or? For
myself, it's got to be something I'm truly interested in. Otherwise, there's no, life's too short to build something that I'm not interested in. So it's got to be something fun. But then maybe if, you know, a sponsor is like interested in a certain type of build and it interests me as well, then we'll entertain it. So we got the space for that kind of stuff. So yeah, and honestly, we want to keep doing this for a while. So we'll probably get in the habit of building a pro level car slowly, not waiting until we absolutely have to build it. So we kind of want to have a pro level car in queue, being built, being ready, and then when we need to retire any one of these cars, we could just switch stuff over.
So you want to be ahead of the curve in case something really bad happens, like you roll the car, like what happened to Ryan Turk a couple of years ago.
It happens, and it's happened to me before. I've had to build the S14 that is running in Pro Spec. I had to build that car in 1 month because I totaled it, and then there was another FD round coming up a month later, and we just had to do it. I don't want to be in that position again.
No, I've been in that place too, and it's a bad place to be.
Yeah. Around how empty it was and how much of this we filled in. We used to use the trailers that were out there for like storage.
Right.
And this is like what you need. It's crazy how much space you need to run an FD program.
Yeah, I like it.
Everything under one roof.
Yeah. I like that it's like square. So in my country, a lot of the stuff is like narrow and deep, all the shop spaces, and this is like kind of nice that it's a square.
Yeah, so where Carlos is hiding. But yeah, we got a little bit.
You want me to blur out your face?
That's cool.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's all the carbon over here.
Yeah.
That's nice.
This is not done yet, but it's kind of cool to have a clean spot within the shop that you can, you know.
Yeah. Oh, that's really
chill out a little bit and actually do administrative work as well.
This is nice. Which one is your favorite cup or your favorite victory? Which one do you hold like the most dear?
Probably my first win in Atlanta, 2015, because you know the first win's always super sweet.
Yeah.
And we have photos of that. It's actually inside the house. We got some good moments captured. It was just like it was really something to like get the confidence that like okay, we not only could get in the podium, we could actually win overall. So that was like it was very encouraging.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, and some of these are cool because this is from RDS, this is from Latvia, from the
HGK,
stuff. Yeah,
HGK challenge. Which car did you drive out there again? Remind me. Did you have a BMW?
E36.
Oh, you drove a BMW. Did you like it?
Yeah, I loved it. It was really cool. It was easy to drive, very balanced. It showed up. It was supposed to show up during practice. It didn't show up because they were putting a new engine in, so it took a long time. And then qualifying started the next day. In the car, I was like, oh, it's still not there. They're like, Odi, don't worry, we'll show up. It finally showed up like halfway through qualifying. I got to do 2 warm-up laps in it, and luckily the car's so dialed, it felt super easy to drive. I just needed 2 laps, and it was fine. So.
Yeah, it's like a very underrated chassis. I was talking to an FD driver that wants to move to a different chassis from the E36 in Vegas, and I was like, man.
It's a tough move to do that. I mean, I think the E36 is like the S chassis of BMWs because it's very light to begin with. It makes more grip than an S chassis ever will because it's a trailing arm car. There's less adjustability, but it's such a good platform because you can make it as heavy as you want and you can make it as light as most of the rules allow you to make a car. So, and the wheelbase is perfect. It's a little bit longer than like an S chassis or a 350Z or a 370Z, so it has the stability. But yet it's nimble and lightweight enough to where it moves around quickly.
Yeah, and it's front rack, which is for me always a big thing.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because over here it's like the oddball car, and in Europe it's the go-to car. Like it's like 80% of European grassroots.
It's gonna probably it's probably going to trend to that here eventually. There's only so many like S chassis people could build, and they're going up in price like crazy. So it's kind of becoming unattainable.
Yeah.
So I'm going to see a lot more of that, I think.
The big ones over here, that's so nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's do that tomorrow, dude. Cool. I got it's birthday tomorrow, so
So look at this S15 over here, Kevlar trunk lid, and he has the fuel tank over the rear axle. Is this your preference, the fuel tank over the rear axle? Did you run?
Yeah, I just don't want to. I don't want to have more weight over the rear axle than absolutely needed.
Right.
And yeah, and that's changing weight too. Like fuel, like after 2 runs, what do you guys put in at the gallon and a half?
2.5 gallons.
2.5 gallons after 2 runs.
Because you're like
that's 6 pounds about, or 5 pounds a gallon, or yeah, that's changing weight, man. It's diminishing weight. So yeah, you don't. And when it's behind the axle, it's very exaggerated, that weight.
Right.
A lot of polar weight, so yeah, we try not to have too much of it.
Yeah, the only thing is you'll have a little increase in center of gravity, but like that offsets against that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you run. You always run anti-roll bars on your stuff. Is that like your?
Yeah.
It's like, or it's like a requirement for oval tracks, I guess.
No, we run it quite often. I could run this car probably just fine without it as well. But it could handle the extra weight that the roll bar adds to the car. And I prefer it with the roll bar. I could go a little bit softer on spring rate with the roll bar.
Right.
So it's a good balance.
Right.
Technically, I could go around without the sway bar, no problem, with just adding spring rate and no roll bar. But this, I think, overall is like a better feeling car.
Right.
To have softer rate and sway bar.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of interesting because in Europe it's kind of a new thing. Most guys don't run a sway bar. It's kind of interesting. Like the consensus seems to be like, yeah, in America on the ovals you need it, but it's also like cars here are so much more gripped up than in Europe. Like it's almost like you're driving a standard car because there's 1,000 horse, which is 5 times more than standard, but it also has 5 times more grip and more tire than standard. So it's not like you flex the throttle and it lights it up for the whole track. You actually need to know.
These cars are like rubber bands. Like they're so wound up because the grip. So yeah, they're kind of difficult to drive because they like slingshot from corner to corner. Every transition is like a slingshot basically. Like it's a handful. So yeah, it's got to be very easy to handle because with that grip, it's essentially hard to drive. So everything that we can do to make the car as predictable as possible, suspension-wise, we do it, and that's why there's sway bars on it.
So it should almost be boring to drive. So in tandems, like you can do, if somebody's like screwing up a little bit in front of you, you need to modulate.
Yeah, but I mean, the car is so wound up that even on a solo run, unless you completely take all the grip out of it, it's not easy to drive.
Right.
Like, flat out. There's moments where it picks up a lot of speed and it's very sensitive to how much angle it's got. Like it's crazy.
Do you change a lot of Ackerman according to different tracks that you go on?
No. We play around with front toe a little bit, but even that, like, we find a sweet spot and we usually stick with it.
So it's like driver preference, like what kind of angle you like to be on huge angle.
I like it, where it's appropriate. I obviously need to be up to the same pace as all my competitors, so you have to understand where you could use the angle. And the judges are pretty clear about, like, we want massive angle here, wherever there's like an area where they expect you to slow down, they prefer it done with angle. The car's got to behave properly at big angle. You got to be able to pull that angle back out when needed as well.
Did you have, is a lot of difference between this car and the S14 because you built this? And
yeah, the S14 is more similar to, it's like the middle between my S15 and my S13 because the S14 is more front heavy, whereas S15 is 50-50 weight distribution, maybe a fraction of a percent heavier towards the rear. So it's more wound up because when you swing this car, yes, there's more weight over the rear axle, so it's a little tougher. You have to commit because momentum of the back moving, you're moving more weight. So it's a little tough, but the trade-off is that when you want to dig out of something, all that weight over the rear axle allows it, to dig out. I think it's more difficult to drive. I think the S14 is a lot easier to drive, and I think that's a really good car for Evan that's driving it in the Pro Spec class right now.
Right.
Yeah, it's got all OBP pedal set and handbrake.
Right. I like the NASCAR.
A lot of the shit from the inside of the car is from England.
Right.
And the dash is from Russia.
Oh, this is the famous thing, like the left-hand drive S15.
Yeah, it's the Monster Service dash. And the carbon Kevlar body kit's from Lithuania.
Oh, really?
Like a real international deal.
Yeah. And you've got your suspension from Estonia, so there's lots of Baltics. Yeah, and you made a point about this thing, right? That's like a very important part of the car.
Yeah, if you have windows, I mean, you need positive cabin pressure, otherwise smoke starts seeping in. As soon as there's a little bit more pressure inside the car than outside, then smoke is never really going inside the car, because it only smoke goes from high pressure areas to low pressure areas. So as long as you could keep the cab somewhat a little bit higher pressure than outside the car, then you're safe. You're okay. That's
a really good idea. A lot of the rally guys have it too.
Yeah, definitely, because they have silt as a problem. It starts to seep into the car.
And like every American build, this seems to have the steel-lit paint as well. Is that right? Yeah, that's like the new thing. Like 80% of all the cars at SEMA were like steel-lit.
We got actual cans that showed up at the shop. So.
This cage is really good, though. This is one of the best.
Yeah, the guy that built the cage was an instructor at the Fab School, is what it's called. It's like a very famous fabrication school.
It's crazy good. Like, it's one of the best cages I've ever seen in a drift car.
Yeah, he did a phenomenal job on it.
It's so simple, like it's so clean. Like, that's very, very nice.
So we copied the S14 cage, but this one is a lot further back because my seating position is really far back in this car. That was one of the efforts of getting the weight distribution proper. And we tried so hard, that's why the PDMs are in the back.
Right.
And even the reservoirs for the brakes and the clutch is behind the seat. So everything that we possibly could shift weight on, we did.
Wow.
Like down to the fluid for the brakes. Like everything's as far back as possible. But not behind the rear axle, because we don't want polar weight.
Big Vortech supercharger on Audi's car is very well known for it. We talked about this a little bit before when we met at Apple Valley, that there's a lot of work in the belt configuration so it doesn't fly off, because my experience is that a lot of people have belt trouble in drifting with superchargers, but Audi has that covered. One really cool feature is the working lights here. That's really cool. Very smart, of course. A lot of night driving going on, so really smart to put it over there. Some stitch welding going on here, as you can see. Of course, I shouldn't forget to pick up some of the Feal socks, because I want them for years and I always keep forgetting it. Wisefab. This is the
older one.
The older one. You're not running the V2, right?
No, like we had a lot of these. Not a lot, but we had them, and then we had the spares. And I actually like this simple design.
Me too.
We never adjust caster at the top mount, so there's no need for me to, have the extra pieces.
Like, can I ask you about the shocks? So the shocks that you run, would you recommend, like, if somebody would hit you up and say, I want the exact same shock, same valving, same springs that you have on your car, would you recommend it, or would you say like that's...
I would, but honestly, these are three-way adjustable. There's high-speed compression, low-speed compression, and rebound adjustability. I would tell them just get the two-way adjustable shocks, because it is kind of a chore. It's a lot of work to adjust the three-ways. The range of adjustability is actually not as high as the two-ways, and all the adjustments are a lot more like fine detailed. Like there's 23 clicks of compression, but you literally have to do like 10 or more clicks at a time to like notice a difference on the shock dyno, let alone driving the car. So it's kind of a chore to adjust these things. You have to move the knobs a lot. And there's a lot of crosstalk between low speed and high speed compression. So the two-way kit is internally valved the same, It just one knob adjusts high speed and low speed
Right.
compression, and there's only 16 clicks, and each click has a big significant jump. We designed the two-way adjuster mechanism ourselves, and I did that intentionally because I wanted something that gives you quick instant feedback. The three-way adjuster parts are made by Penske, which is super high-end stuff. It's made very well. It's the best three-way adjuster mechanism that we've been able to get our hands on. We've tested so many, but it's a lot more difficult to adjust. Just the nature of a three-way shock. You can't separate low speed and high speed adjustments completely from one another.
Right.
It's tough. So there's a lot of crosstalk between it. So you're adjusting high speed and it's changing low speed, or vice versa, and sometimes that's just confusing. So
Yeah. Yeah, I understand what you mean. So it's one of those things like you really need to know what you're doing and have like a suspension engineer on board, and as driver be able to communicate with that person as well and know what you want. And that's like very rare that you're both a driver and have a team that can accommodate that.
Yeah, I mean, whoever's adjusting the shocks has their hands full with the three-way.
Right.
And if they don't think that they have their hands full doing it, then they're probably not
Right.
even getting close to doing it
Right,
right. So
right,
it's just,
right.
I'd say get the two ways, unless you have a suspension like nerd on your team,
Right, that really
that
knows.
is like able to do that for you.
Right, and the Nitrous, of course, that's super. Like, would you say that? So you run a power adder with the supercharger, and you run the Nitrous to spool, or to
both? Yeah. So it's a big blower, just like a big turbo. It takes a little bit more effort to get the low RPM horsepower achieved. So we spray nitrous at it to wake the engine up faster. Right. But then with this car, a lot more versus my S14. With this car, I had to start using it to gain more power at the peak RPM as well, because this car makes more grip. It's loading the rear suspension more.
Right.
So I had to start really playing, and this season was great. Like we started utilizing nitrous on the peak power a lot more, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, nitrous is amazing. I mean, I don't see why everyone is not using it.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are like kind of scared of it, but if you set it up correctly, and you need to have some safeties built in, of course. We saw Chelsea have a problem with the solenoid. Was it in Monroe that he sprayed his whole bottle over the windscreen?
Yeah.
That's of course what you don't want. But if the computer has a safety in it, like if there's no NOS going out or whatever, then
it's tough, man. We've had, one tiny little failure of a solenoid or a line or something like that could annihilate your motor.
Exactly.
Or while you're driving, you lift off throttle if the solenoid's stuck and it's still spraying nitrous. I mean, it's kind of dangerous, So.
Not so good. And a really big, like for comparison, I don't have freakishly small leprechaun hands, but this is a really big blow off. Like that's
there's just a lot of air volume.
Man, that's crazy. Look at that. Yeah, that looks very nice. Like everybody knows I'm a big V8 guy. Like this is for sure the motor I would run. You're also probably having less weight than with like the traditional, like the roots blowers, because that's like anybody who's ever lifted the roots blower. Yeah, man,
they're heavier than this. The trade-off is that you have to run an intercooler on this. You can't run a air to water cooler in the back like with a root style blower. But I like these. I like driving with high RPM, and these types of blowers like high RPM. It's the more you rev this engine with this supercharger package, the more it rewards you. The horsepower is very linear, and it just makes more and more up top. So it just like never runs out of power with this style blower, because the faster you spin it, the more boost it makes.
Is it difficult to choose the right cam for this setup, or just
not really? We tried a few different cams, and it seems like when boost takes over, it doesn't make that big of a difference.
You just don't want much overlap, or that's like what you don't want. But apart from that,
yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised the differences that we've tried, and overall, like, and power, how it wasn't that big of, if we didn't have nitrous to tool, like as a tool to play with, then yeah, maybe the cam would be something that we'd have to spend maybe even more time developing. Texas Speed has a really good cam. It works just fine. the fact that we have the nitrous, if we feel like we need power at a certain RPM range, that's how we achieve it.
Right.
So,
yeah, super.
Yeah, so it ends at 3 in the afternoon, and then you and I are driving, so it wouldn't be that like the end of the world for us to just go out there after that.
So that's the practice car we saw at Apple Valley. Like a really simple setup. I like this a lot. It's converted to S14 front end, so that's what a lot of people like to do. I like that a little better because the flap headlights, it's cool, but this is kind of more my style. The typical Audi thing where it cuts the rear wheel, cuts through the rear fender. Look at that, that's really cool. It's going to be a really rad shop when it's completely ready to go. Some nice body parts up there. Good stuff. So thanks a lot for your time, Audi. I have one question left, and that's the following question: if there was no S chassis, what car would you run in FD?
I think this is a boring answer, but probably like an E46,
right?
Because it's a trailing arm car, a good wheelbase, lightweight. Yeah, man. I like driving more than building cars, so.
Right.
I think that the build would be easy and fast, and
yeah,
I think it's a good chassis, man. I've driven the E36, E46, driven E90s, and man, the E36 felt really good. It's really ugly. The E46 is like just as good mechanically, and suspension wise, it's just not as ugly. So
it's a little more rigid. Like if you drive, especially if you drive them. Like in FD, you guys can't do like European style cages.
Yeah.
So you can't connect everything, and then the E46 is way more rigid than the E36.
Okay.
So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, and nice, like after all those years that I've been running your stuff, to finally have a little in-depth conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for stopping by.
Cool. Good.